On this Friday night, slamming the brakes. GM temporarily shuts down an Ontario factory, the hundreds of people being laid off, and why the company says it's not related to tariffs. Turmoil among TurboTax users.
I now owed $10,000.
Why they've been left with huge bills. Snowbird saying so long to the U.S.
A country that is led by a fool.
How more Canadians are parting ways with their American properties. And the return of Captain Canuck.
Oh, thank you. Duty calls.
The patriotic superhero Canadians are clamoring for.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Carolyn Jarvis.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us. Canada's already battered auto industry received another blow tonight. Manufacturing giant General Motors revealed it will temporarily shut down operations at its assembly plant in Ingersoll, Ontario next month. It's expected to result in the indefinite layoff of 500 workers. The company says the decision is not due to Trump's tariffs, instead, market demand. Prime Minister Mark Carney responded saying today's layoffs are deeply painful news for auto workers in Ingersoll and for workers throughout Canada's auto industry. Our Jeff Semple is following this story and joins us now. Jeff, what are you hearing?
Well, Carolyn, more bad news for Canada's auto industry. The GM plant in Ingersoll, which is near London, Ontario, employs around 1,200 people, and nearly half of those are being laid off indefinitely. The rest will be laid off temporarily. That GM plant is set to close on Monday. It will then reopen briefly next month for what the company calls limited production. After that, it will shut down again before reopening in October. During that downtime, the union says GM plans to complete retooling work that was needed to prepare the facility for production of the 2026 model. Just 3 years ago, that plant was transitioned to start producing GM's BrightDrop electric vans and delivery vehicles, becoming GM's first commercial EV manufacturing plant. But even before Donald Trump's trade war, sales had been sluggish. The company was dealing with excess inventory. In a statement, the company says GM remains committed to the future of BrightDrop and the CAMI plant and will support employees through the transition. This adjustment is directly related to responding to market demand and rebalancing inventory. Production of BrightDrop and EV battery assembly will remain at CAMI. Now, for its part, Unifor, the union that represents these workers, is blaming President Trump's trade war and his U-turn on America's EV subsidies.
We're seeing a shift in EV policy in the United States right now. Obviously, President Trump is not as keen on transforming the auto industry, except to crush it with his tariffs.
These job cuts follow news last week that Stellantis, the conglomerate that owns Chrysler, Dodge, Fiat, and Jeep, is temporarily laying off 3,500 workers at its major auto plant in Windsor, Ontario. So Canada's auto sector, this country's largest manufacturing industry, our second largest exporter, continues to be one of the industry's hardest hit by U.S. President Donald Trump's policies. Carolyn?
Thanks, Jeff. U.S. stocks saw a welcome upswing today at the end of a volatile week of market whiplash. All three major U.S. indices, along with the TSX, started down in early morning trading. The White House announced it had more than 15 offers on the table for potential trade agreements, and that news delivered a bounce to the market. There are signs those gains will be short-lived, though. China fired back today by boosting tariffs on the U.S. to 125%. The U.S. dollar fell to a 3-year low, and yields on U.S. bonds spiked sharply, both signals that the world's faith in the U.S. economy has been shaken. It's part of the reason Mark Carney was in Prime Minister mode in Ottawa to convene a meeting of the Cabinet Committee on Canada-U.S. Relations. As David Akin reports, Canada's strategy for retaliatory tariffs was a key talking point. David.
Well, Carolyn, this is the third time that the Liberals have paused their leaders campaign. There's no rallies, no platform announcements today, so that the leader can assume some of the duties of the Prime Minister. And those duties included a 90-minute Parliament Hill meeting of the Cabinet Committee on Canada-U.S. Relations, held at the end of a chaotic week for global markets.
A really marked tightening in financial conditions, a slowing, the initial signs of slowing in the global economy, impacts that we're starting to see unfortunately in the Canadian economy, particularly in the Canadian labour market.
Canada's tariff situation remained unchanged, and Prime Minister Carney had nothing to say about any changes to Canada's counter-tariff strategy.
We reviewed our response to those tariffs, our core strategy of to fight, to protect, and to build.
But Carney says the steps his cabinet is taking now will benefit the next government.
We left instructions for officials to ensure that the next government, whichever government Canadians choose, will be in the best possible position for negotiations with the United States.
And that was it. No questions were taken today. Now, Liberals will tell you that they like it when Carney gets to play the role of Prime Minister rather than campaigning leader. And, well, Carney's opponents, well, they roll their eyes and say he's trying to use the office to his political advantage. In any event, it's campaigning Carney Saturday with an announcement and perhaps some reporters' questions. Carolyn.
Thanks, David. As Carney deals with the tariff threats, his party's election campaign is facing another challenge: controversy in the Ontario riding of Markham-Unionville again. The Liberals' original candidate there stepped down over remarks he made calling for a Conservative opponent to be turned into Chinese authorities. Now, concerns related to Chinese foreign interference have cropped up around the party's replacement candidate. Mercedes Stephenson joins us with more details from Ottawa. Mercedes.
Carolyn, concerns about foreign interference were in play on the election trail this week, with both the Liberals and the Conservatives fielding queries about India and China potentially trying to influence their parties. Former National Security Advisor Dick Fadden told the West Bloc countries with an interest in election meddling may have been more prepared for the Canadian election than Canadian political parties were.
Well, this will sound rather odd, but I think some of these countries are better organized than we are. They knew that an election was coming.
Fadden says the early dropping of so many candidates suggests parties may not be vetting candidates as carefully as they should be, including for foreign interference. This week alone, the Conservatives faced questions about individuals associated with pro-Indian government groups donating to Pierre Poilievre's leadership campaign, while the Liberals faced questions about a Beijing-linked online influence operation and a riding again in the spotlight. On Thursday, Liberal leader Mark Carney went sharply on the defensive when he was asked about the party's new candidate for the riding of Markham-Unionville, a man who is named Peter Ewan. The Globe and Mail reported that Ewan was connected to Beijing-friendly groups.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, but you can't believe everything you read in the Globe and Mail. So in your question, and I guess in the article in question, you said I had a meeting with whatever your term was, Beijing group. I've never heard of this group, okay? Never heard of this group. Certainly didn't have a set-up meeting with this group. Full stop.
Ewan replaced the incumbent MP and Liberal candidate Paul Chiang. Chiang commented a Toronto area Conservative candidate should be turned into the Chinese consulate for a bounty. We decided to visit the Markham-Unionville riding to get a feel for what's happening on the ground. While we heard some general concerns about influence from the Chinese Communist Party, most of what we heard was like other ridings in Canada. People were less focused on local candidates and more on which of the two leaders they want to be the next Prime Minister. Carolyn?
Thanks, Mercedes. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was in Ontario today promoting his economic action plan for Canada. He's promising to improve affordability and boost economic activity, and turning to the days of former Prime Minister Stephen Harper to help. Mackenzie Gray is following the campaign. Mackenzie.
After stumping with him earlier this week, Carolyn, Pierre Poilievre was channeling his inner Stephen Harper.
We need a change in government with a new Conservative leadership that has a Canada-first economic action plan.
No new policies announced by the Conservatives, just recycling an old slogan.
Generations.
A throwback to these ads and signs that Stephen Harper had dotting highways, bridges and schools after the Great Recession.
The Canadian taxpayers.
Which Harper brought in after beating Paul Martin in 2006. A former Liberal PM who loomed over the announcement today. The MV Paul Martin docked outside the Poilievre press conference at a St. Catharines shipyard.
What we need is a change.
Where he faced questions on a topic that also dogged Harper, abortion.
Question about the local candidate here in St. Catharines.
One of the local Conservative candidates previously worked in an organization that compared abortion to the Holocaust. But Poilievre made it clear that his over 30 anti-abortion MPs, as labeled by the political lobby group Campaign Life Coalition, would not be able to bring in any abortion law.
There will be no laws or other restrictions imposed on a woman's right to decide to do with her body as she wishes, and that is something that I am guaranteeing to you and to all Canadians.
Poilievre's abortion response came from one of only 4 questions asked by media outlets chosen by the Conservatives. Asked if he was afraid to take reporters' questions, Poilievre pivoted to blame Mark Carney.
That's why he is not responding to questions. I'm here sharing a message of hope and change.
While Mark Carney and all the other party leaders might not answer all the questions we ask, Carolyn, they take considerably more compared to Poilievre, despite the Conservatives promising the most accessible and transparent campaign in Canadian history.
Thanks, Mackenzie. New travel rules kick in today for some Canadians visiting the United States. Anyone staying for 30 days or longer must register with the U.S. government, and they may need to get fingerprinted. The requirements, along with President Trump's aggressive rhetoric and a weak Canadian dollar, have triggered a Snowbird sell-off. Taria Isri explains.
The appeal of Florida has washed away for Canadians like Natalie Mancuso.
We just didn't want to continue investing and giving our money, to a country that is led by a fool.
She and her husband vacationed there for 15 years, but don't plan on returning. The Quebecers sold their condo north of Fort Lauderdale last month, fed up with U.S. President Donald Trump.
We were very disappointed to have to take this decision, but we felt like we couldn't betray our souls. The way he was insulting Canadians as if, we're just, piece of carpet under your feet. Nope.
Mancuso is part of a wave of Canadians getting rid of their U.S. properties.
It is a major shift. There's multiple reasons, but definitely they want to sell and they want to cash out and bring back their money to Canada.
The real estate exodus is happening from east to west. Dale McMullen just sold his winter home in Arizona. The last straw was Trump's repeated 51st state comments.
It's enough. We don't want to support that anymore. And that we came home and we'll join in and get our elbows up.
Annexation threats, the trade war, and a battered Canadian dollar are pushing snowbirds out.
Well, my phone's been ringing off the hook. I normally have 2-3 listings at a time at this time of the year, and then they sell and I get a couple more. Right now I have 16 listings.
Some Canadians aren't ready to part ways just yet, but are worried about the new border rules.
We'd like to comply, but if that becomes a problem, then we got to sell our house and get out.
Canadians top the list of foreign buyers in the U.S., with most of the purchases in Florida and Arizona. But escaping the cold appears less attractive when the U.S.-Canada relationship is also frigid. Taria Isri, Global News, Montreal.
President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, was face-to-face with President Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg today for talks aimed at ending the war in Ukraine. Witkoff touched down exactly 1 month after Moscow rejected the Trump administration's proposal for a full and unconditional ceasefire. Vincent McAvenny reports.
Donald Trump's diplomatic envoy Steve Witkoff in St. Petersburg for a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The U.S. administration had hoped to make progress on Ukrainian ceasefire talks. But a Kremlin spokesperson played down the significance of Mr. Witkoff's third visit, signaling arrangements were underway for a possible meeting between the two presidents.
It is a complex effort, and you should not expect any breakthroughs.
President Trump expressed his impatience ahead of the meeting, posting, "Russia has to get moving. Too many people are dying, thousands a week, in a terrible and senseless war." Meanwhile, President Zelensky made a visit to his home city of Kryvyi Rih to visit a playground where 11 adults and 9 children were killed in a Russian strike a week ago. Symbolic, Kyiv says, of Putin's desire to prolong the war. In Brussels, Canada took part in a NATO meeting with the alliance pledging an additional 33 billion Canadian dollars in military aid for Ukraine. The British Defence Secretary said plans for a peacekeeping force were now well advanced. Special Envoy Witkoff is expected to travel to Oman for direct talks with Iran's foreign minister on its nuclear weapons program Saturday. Earlier this week, Iran's president said they will give the talks a genuine chance.
We want peace. We want security. We are people of dialogue, but with dignity and pride.
Nonetheless, President Trump gave this warning.
If it requires military, we're going to have military.
Protesters on Tehran's streets today made their feelings clear on the talks. With geopolitical turbulence swirling, others are welcoming at least an attempt at dialogue. Vincent McAviney, Global News, London.
An aviation disaster in Florida. Coming up, what witnesses say the plane was doing moments before it crashed. Three people were killed when their plane went down and burst into flames near a major highway in Boca Raton, Florida. Debris was scattered across the road and onto nearby train tracks. Witnesses say the plane was flying low and circled the airport several times before crashing shortly after takeoff. One person on the ground was taken to hospital with non-life-threatening injuries after driving through the fireball and hitting a tree. A U.S. immigration judge has ruled the Trump administration can deport Columbia University student and activist Mahmoud Khalil. This is despite the fact he is a legal permanent resident who has not been charged with a crime. Khalil was arrested in New York last month for taking part in campus protests in support of Palestinians. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio ordered his deportation, arguing Khalil's activism is anti-Semitic and undermines U.S. foreign policy. The judge determined that was enough evidence for the deportation to proceed. Khalil's lawyers have until April 23rd to request a stay of his removal. The case is part of Trump's widespread crackdown on pro-Palestinian student protesters, which has been widely condemned as an attack on free speech. Trouble with TurboTax? Ahead, taxpayers on the hook for thousands. Why they believe the software is at fault. Many Canadians rely on software programs to file their taxes. The process should be straightforward and easy, but for some Ontario taxpayers, it's been anything but. They filed their taxes using the popular TurboTax software program. Now they're learning they owe the government thousands. Sean O'Shea explains.
Very big surprise, nasty surprise, I dare say.
For Tim O'Shea of Oakville, who is not related, he'd filled out taxes for his daughter, as he does every year.
What was the trigger? How did this come to light that this money was owed to the government?
The triggering event was an audit which CRA did for 3 years worth of Ontario provincial credits.
Following the TurboTax software, Tim's daughter got $15,000 in credits. Michael Ribeiro of Mississauga did the same until an audit said he wasn't entitled.
They found that we incorrectly claimed that we were eligible for a credit for the rate relief for daycare.
Same with Cheryl Wong.
It gave us the credit because it only calculated the credit based on one income and not both of ours.
Global News is aware of as many as 100 TurboTax filers facing audits and CRA demands to pay. There could be many more. But Intuit, the company that owns TurboTax, denies it's at fault, saying in an email, "Our product is calculating the tax correctly. The accurate calculation of this credit relies on user inputs." The company lays the blame on tax filers, some of whom they say were using a mode which allowed them to decline having their information reviewed by the software before filing.
They have denied any refund with respect to the penalties that I incurred.
In its marketing, TurboTax guarantees its calculations are 100% accurate. 3 years ago, TurboTax agreed to pay $141 million in restitution after a New York State investigation into a misleading ad campaign. The company didn't admit any wrongdoing.
It was a very unfortunate surprise one day when we got the 3 letters from the CRA.
Now Canadian customers are stuck with unexpected bills, and they say TurboTax should step up.
But as it stands right now, Sean, it's just not ethically right.
Pay us for the interest that we had to pay because of a mistake on their end.
TurboTax is not offering any compensation at this point.
And they're deciding to batten down the hatches because if they pay one person like myself, they'll have to pay everybody.
Sean O'Shea, Global News, Toronto.
Next, the comic book superhero that's become a symbol of Canadian independence. We've seen many fearless Canadians stand up in the face of U.S. threats. They may not wear a cape, but the hero you're about to meet does. Here's Eric Sorensen.
Got one more. Looking for a new comic book hero? Maybe Canada's had one all along. Captain Canuck was created in the 1970s. Some fans remember.
It was the first Canadian comic I had ever seen, so it kind of blew my mind.
Back then, Captain Canuck did battle with Russians and other bad guys.
Never in any of those stories was it America that was going to be taking over Canada.
But it seems that's the threat now. So new villains, looks like Donald and Elon, have Canadians yearning for more Captain Canuck.
We're getting more and more calls from Canadian companies. We have Mr. Trump to thank for a bit of resurgence.
Happy Canada Day, folks.
So we have Captain Canuck, but he isn't alone out there.
Hey, Canada. Thank you for coming over.
You want Canadian content in your superheroes? No problem.
You're welcome, Canada.
A would-be prime minister is suiting up, sort of.
Elbows out. Elbows up.
Though the politician dubbed Captain Canada didn't need an outfit, just a hat. Canada is not for sale. And because we look out for our neighbors, neither is Greenland.
We should hit back hard, and hit back strong.
We'll tariff them where it hurts on Canadian bacon, hockey pucks, and syrup, the maple kind.
A lot of Canadians, thinking about their identity as Canadians and feeling more united as Canadians. We feel like, okay, we've got to stand in opposition to these proposals.
But remember, heroes like Captain Canuck are always polite.
Oh my God, I'm your biggest fan!
Sorry, miss, I don't have time right now. Oh, thank you. Duty calls.
And duty calls now. Even in the imaginary world of comic books, few imagined a story in which Captain Canuck must defend his country against America. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Friday night. Tonight's Your Canada showcases two patriotic homes, one in Truro, Nova Scotia, the other in Chilliwack, BC, and a postcard perfect shot from Jasper, Alberta. Thanks for watching. Hope you'll join us again tomorrow. Have a great night.